You say, wow, if we can find out when it begins, we can find out when it ends. Well, we can find out when it begins in the next verse. Understand it from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem. When was that? That was Artaxerxes. Artaxerxes, in 440s, made a decree to rebuild the temple, to rebuild the city, and let the Jews do that. That's when it started. And so you can start counting from there. 7 weeks, 62 weeks. That's 69 weeks. It'll be 69 weeks unto the Messiah the Prince. 69 weeks to the Messiah the Prince. And it's been calculated to be exact to the very day when Messiah came. Now that leaves how many weeks left? 1 week. There's one loose week, and that's the problem. We know the 69 ended when Messiah came, but the 70th hasn't come yet. So we have an undetermined time gap between the 69th and the 70th. Now, verse 27. There is a prince in verse 26 who will come in the future. This prince is going to come, and he's going to bring desolation. There's that word again that means ruination, devastation. And he's going to come and make a covenant with Israel for 1 week. And in the middle of that week, he will cause the sacrifice and the offerings to cease, just exactly like Antiochus Epiphanes did. And we know this isn't talking about Antiochus because all of this is connected to the coming of Messiah, isn't it? All of this is connected to the end of sin and the end of transgression and the end of iniquity and the bringing in of everlasting righteousness and the anointing of the most holy and the time of the kingdom. So it's got to be at the second coming. But he's going to go into halfway through that 7 years, which would be 3.5 years, 42 months, 1,260 days, cause the sacrifice to stop, and then he's going to bring the overspreading of abominations that make desolate. There's the abomination of desolation. And he's going to do this until the consummation, and that which is determined shall be poured out upon the desolate. In other words, he's going to do it till the end in God's final judgment. So the future ruler, the future prince, the willful king, the little horn, the antichrist, the beast out of the sea, whatever you want to call him, the man of sin, the son of perdition, various terms. He is going to make a covenant with Israel during that final week. So what you have then is the coming of Christ. And just before that, you have a 7-year period. That 7-year period is initiated when Israel makes a covenant with this prince, this king, who is the leader of the Western Confederacy, who will be a protector for Israel. Halfway through the week, he turns on Israel, stops their sacrifices, sets up an idol in the midst of the temple, stops all of their worship, makes them worship this false god, this false idol, abominates the place so that it goes into ruination and Jews won't go near it. Now, go to chapter 12 of Daniel. Listen very carefully in these last few moments. In Daniel chapter 12, verse 11, please, he mentions it again. And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, that's the abomination of desolation, and the abomination that makes desolate set up. Would you please notice it's set up. It doesn't happen in one moment. It becomes permanent. That's why Matthew 24:15 says, shall stand in the holy place. It isn't a momentary thing. It is something set up there that is an abomination that ruins the place, and it's made permanent there. It stands there. So from the time that the daily sacrifice is taken away and the abomination that makes desolate is set up, there'll be 1,290 days. You say, wait a minute. From the time in the middle, 1,290 days. That's 30 days more than 3.5 years. Where'd the extra 30 come from? Revelation 12:6 says it'll be 1,260 days. Daniel says 1,290 days. Why the disparity? I think the best explanation of that is that it is in those 30 days, after the tribulation is ended, that the Lord, when He comes to the Mount of Olives, as it says in Zechariah, creates a great valley into which all the nations of the world are gathered to be judged. And I believe Daniel has taken us 30 days beyond to give us that time frame in which there will be the judging of the nations, described in Matthew 25 as the judgment of the sheep and goats, in which all the living people still on the earth at the end of the tribulation are gathered together to the Lord to be judged as to their suitability for heaven and hell. And it is that 30-day period which we see here in Daniel that is added to the Revelation text. Further, look at verse 12. Blessed is the one who waits and comes all the way to the 1,335 days. Now we got 45 more days. The blessed people are going to last another 45. I mean, if you're in that so the implication here is that a judgment occurs at the 1290 period. And that's what I think is being described. There's a 30-day period in there in which that judgment of the nations takes place. Blessed are those who go into the next 45-day period. What's that? I believe the next 45-day period that goes to 1335 is a transition time for the setting up of the kingdom. The Lord establishes His throne in Jerusalem. The Lord sets us in places of rulership, in places of representation, and as envoys throughout the world, and establishes His kingdom, begins to bring the nations to Him, starts disseminating the rules and the principles for the Messianic millennium, and that is that 45-day period. So Daniel then sees the abomination of desolation. Then Revelation takes us 1,260 days, end of tribulation. 30 more days for the judgment of the nations. 45 more days for the establishing of the millennial kingdom, and then on into the kingdom. Prophecy is so explicit. But the thing that triggers it all is the abomination of desolation, the desecration of the holy place. Now, you say, well, okay, I've got that, but what is it? Let me show you what it is. Go to the 13th chapter of Revelation. And this is it as specifically as it can be stated. Revelation 13. We ought to give you a degree for this message this morning. Boy. Now, in Revelation 13, we meet the Antichrist. He's the beast, and he rises. It says in verse 5 of Revelation 13, there was given unto him a mouth, speaking great things and blasphemies. And power was given to him to continue 42 months. There's that same 3.5 years. He only goes for 1,260 days, 3.5 years, 42 months. He doesn't last beyond that. That's his time of period. That 30-day period is a time after the tribulation has ended. So 42 months, he does his blasphemy. See, he starts out with this nice, peaceful pact. He makes a covenant. In the middle, he starts his blasphemy. He starts to blaspheme God. He opens his mouth, verse 6, and blasphemes against God. He blasphemes His name, His tabernacle, and them that dwell in heaven. All right. He starts attacking God in that midweek point. And we see specifically how he attacks. Watch this. He makes war with the saints. He overcomes them. Power is given him over all kindreds, tongues, and nations. All that dwell upon the earth shall what? Worship him. What's the abomination of desolation? Who is the idol set up in the holy place? It's him. He sets himself up as the idol. He sets himself up as the object of worldwide worship. And then beginning in verse 11, you meet his cohort, the false prophet, who is another beast. He comes up and he does great signs and wonders. At the end of verse 14, his job is to bring the world to worship the image of the beast. He gives power to the image, verse 15, so that it can speak and so forth and so on. I don't know, with all the robotics we have today, that this would even be a problem. It could be so marvelous that we wouldn't know it wasn't actually a human being. Then again, it may be, who knows what satanic things can come out of this kind of situation. But he causes the whole world to worship, and as many as don't worship the image of the beast are going to be slaughtered.